all of the Season 1 Mythic Plus affixes were added to the game. Necrotic and Inspiring are not there. Seems like they've been goddamn cut.
And one of them replaced at least there with the... Oh, sorry, never mind, that's Season 1 affix.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Basically, they've taken unpopular shit and removed it. And I do remember at some point some interview sort of saying like, yeah, we might tone down just like the regular affixes and kind of focus more on the seasonal stuff.
Well, that's what they've been doing design-wise in terms of tweaking the existing ones. They've been kind of going, oh yeah, well this used to be just a straight-up fingering. It's gone now. Or it's easy.
They are baby mode in many cases compared to Shadowlands launch.
Yeah.
Which is already in Season 4.
Yeah, which is weird because it is like... I have to give it to them. As much as I hated affixes, or as I hate most affixes, there are some that I actually quite enjoy. Like, I enjoy working with Grievous and stuff like that whenever I'm healing. I actually think those are meaningfully different enough to the texture of how you play. But some of them are just kind of brutal, like Storming sucked. But the thing about it is they were at least damage that came from additional layers of design. And this is something that specifically about how I like to play games. I really do not like it's the same but slightly harder numerically. Because that doesn't actually really matter all that much. I'm there for novelty, and to me, novelty comes across as here's design, here's something else to do, here's something else to think about, here's maybe something happens twice as fast. It's not just, oh, this, but if your gear, because fundamentally speaking, it is about gear, right? Mm-hmm. Once you, and I'm not going to say I play perfectly, I play fucking terribly, I'm horrible at this video game. I used to be vaguely okay once, and then I stopped, I fell out of practice, and now I'm shit. But once you get to the point of playing near perfectly, then after that, it's just numbers. And I don't think that's very enjoyable compared to the affixes where there's probably room for affixes implemented in a more interesting way overall that end up being, hey, here's more design, here's more difficult design. But they do get a decent bit of that out of the seasonal affixes. So I'll say there's maybe a thing where I'm maybe super... In the long view, not super happy with this. In the short view, happy because I don't really like playing around someone. Like Storming when meta used to be an absolute bastard. And now it's tolerable enough because it disappears. And the seasonal affixes actually... Like, I really enjoy the Season 4 affixes because it's like... Yeah. But this is the difference, right? The reason I actually really like the affixes, or the Season 4 affix, is because it's actually changing the mob in the dungeon. It is, that is a new mob with new mechanics that I have to mess with. That feels substantially different to me than like any of the other affixes that I played with that were seasonal.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so I'm going through the usual motions of the dungeon, but with changes. Because I kind of like the 8.3 of, being able to, oh shit, everyone's using Shroud, fuck it, Shroud's an affix now. I kind of like that idea, but it was like, you're playing the dungeon a different way, which is cool. But you're also doing sneaky, stealthy stuff, which I'm not a huge fan of routing. I like to just go, there's the enemies, kill them.
Kill shit, simple as.
Yeah, kill shit, but the shit's doing stuff that you have to actually manage and deal with. I like that part of it. So I very much enjoyed hey, there's a new type of mob. So I'd love to see a little bit more of that of, hey, here's a new mob that makes this dungeon literally different than it was when you played it last time. Also, that's not going to be a problem because they're rotating every season now, so that as well.
Here's the big one, man.
Yeah.
Obviously, Tyrannical and Fortified are still there.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, we may be different to a lot of other Mythic Plus players because a lot of the people who are, they have their fucking, Gunnar glasses on, drinking their esports nutrition fuel, fucking baseball cap backwards, esports jersey, doing Mythic Plus 87s, right? Yeah. The fucking serious Zoomers. One of the things that they have a problem with, understandably because it impacts their playstyle, is how Tyrannical can just get to the point where it's, Lamau, you're fucked. Mm-hmm. You can't do this. You need to start being cheesy and weird. Now, for players like you and me, we generally, I think, prefer Tyrannical because the boss is, really fun. Mm-hmm. And I guess, historically, playing raids more, that's the thing that you and me were into. And it was just interesting looking at chat when we talked about the idea of these two affixes being removed. People were like, yeah, Tyrannical and Fortified's still there. Yep. So I wonder what it's like because Tyrannical and Fortified contributing differently to, contributing to half your rating each, that obviously makes sense because the dungeon does feel pretty damn different in those two different modes.
And it would be metagamed otherwise.
Yeah. But then the issue is that to a lot of people, it's like, oh, I prefer this one. I prefer that one. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's the awkward thing where this is a whole...
I feel like they're probably... They kind of like still have to keep it, I think.
Yeah, this is like... there's a whole thing because I don't know very much about hierarchies outside of tyrannical skills worse than hierarchies and fortified because, you know, bigger boss stuff, more untargetable things that will just kill you and less ways to manage where you can manage mobs. You can't manage bosses by design. You can't just, you know, just chain stun a boss or something like that or, you know, take them by themselves. But it's that thing where... Obviously, there's like tank damage when that gets to a point, it kind of explodes too. But it's this weird thing where the increase in health is... I don't want to say it's lazy, right? Because... And this is a whole thing about what is a boss, what is a design. And this is something I learned to think about through playing many hundreds of hours of Dark Souls at different levels of health and different levels of defense. Where it's like, it's about the amount of mistakes you're allowed. And a health bar is basically how long do you have to survive for without making mistakes. Even like the shmup territory, it's like if you're playing one of the Toho games and you say a boss had half the health, you would make less mistakes because the point is you're dealing with stuff consistently. Like even the same kind of FF where it's like, well, not really because they have the enrage, so it's like a scripted fight the whole way through. But it's that idea of if you add a substantial amount of health, then that just makes the fight longer for no real reason. And you're also kind of bumping up the damage at the same time, of course. But not to the same degree, in the sense of you're now giving people more room for mistakes because the fight is longer. And you're making the mistakes more punishing. But I think it would be a generally better sense of design if, with the gear scaling, it took the same amount of time, but it was substantially more punishing. I think that's kind of it. Or there were more mechanics in the same amount of time. Because you end up getting into the rhythm of, oh, well, once you know how to do a boss, you know how to do that boss. It's just about can you... And this is where it comes into the problem in hierarchies, where it becomes, oh, now it's impossible to do it normally. Okay, well, now you have to work in weird things. You have to work in things like invulnerabilities. You have to work in, you know, crazy amounts of stacking, damage mitigation, and all those kind of weird strats to deal with the numbers getting too out of control. And I feel like that's not designed or less designed than the ideal of this gets harder. You know, it's the difference between going from heroic to mythic, and then, you know, there's no mythic. There's nothing above mythic outside of numbers bigger and affixes, which don't change the actual core design. So that's fundamentally it, where it's like, a tyrannical kind of... It feels like the experience of it is as a result of the idea, as opposed to a design one. And it just gets out of control of... I'd rather them stop blasting health up so much. It needs to go up because with gear you kill them faster. Yeah. And that obviously means just, you know, there's room for there's less chances to make a mistake, is how I put it. But I think it would be handier if they cut the health down way like low and then just bump the damage up so it's more punishing and a little bit faster. That's what I would personally prefer, but I know that goes wrong in high keys because one of the limiters on how far you can push is the incoming damage. Because it's not like, oh well, you could technically fight mobs forever, but if your healer has to pump the whole time and they're out of mana, too bad. Or you don't have the cooldowns to deal with the damage coming in because white damage is wrecking you now. And that's a whole thing of, I could talk for 40, 100 million years about how Mythic Plus and like design for this stuff is getting really weird, and RPGification of gears, like, this is really brutal. That's why I'm afraid of, I talk about this in the upcoming FF video, where it's like homogenization is really dangerous there, because you think, well, what would be a perfect experience and perfect balance? It would be everyone has one button to press, and that button does 1 damage point all the time, and every second you take 10 damage points. So, it's that kind of like really super simplified version. But no, I think about Mythic Plus a lot more than I actually play it, more or less. I think that's what I've proven here today.
We still need to get KSM.
Yeah.
We've been busy and distracted.